Hello, thanks so much for coming to Foyles today on a Saturday for this day-long workshop. This is the first time we've ever done the Novel London Literary Festival here at Foyles, so we're really, really excited, and it's great to see so many people in the room. We've got book sales here as well. We can take sales in the room, so do take a look at what's on display from the writers that you're going to hear from today. As I say, we can make payments in here as well with your cards. I'm the least interesting person that's going to speak today, so I'm going to get out of the way and hand you over to Sheldon from Novel London. Have a really great day.
Thank you everyone for coming. It's the first Novel London Literature Festival. I've been running Novel London for about 3 years. We used to do it every month, but I have a career now as a photographer, so I don't do it as much as I'd like to. How many here have written a book? And how many of you are hoping to get published? And how many of you are hoping to self-publish? Okay, well, we're going to have a really good day. We've got 3 interesting panels and then an evening of readings. There's going to be some times in the breaks to network and buy books and drinks. Okay, have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Hello, do I have sound? Yes, I do. Hello. And we have camera rolling, Sabina? Good, good. Hello. My name is Rohan Quine, and I'm a novelist and an actor, and thank you to Sabina and to Novel London for inviting me. We will be chatting with a couple of authors on this panel on the subject, essentially, of the journey or journeys that they have taken in order to get to this point, where they're each looking at a completed draft of a novel of their own. And my own work is literary fiction with a touch of magical realism and a dusting of horror. And their work is, of course, gloriously different from that and from each other's, because everybody's work is their own glorious beast. So we shall be talking to Kim Sheldon, that's Kim Sheldon there, about her novel Hidden Legacy, and also to Adam Stevenson about his novel Death of the Dream Peddler, including a reading from each. And then at the end I will share a smidgen of my own as well, which also takes in the other thing that we've been asked to touch upon in this session, which is 1 or 2 future-oriented options for publication in terms of format. And just to warn myself that we have to keep schedule, or else we're not going to get everything achieved. So apologies in advance if I have to cut things shorter than I want to along the way. So just thinking about your overall vision here, creating a novel and getting it published involves so many details, of so many kinds, that I'll just start very quickly by suggesting one general guideline which may be of help in making sure that those trees don't make you lose sight of the forest, which is, do not be tempted to bend your vision away from its own authentic truth. I say this for several reasons, but maybe the most practical is that this authentic truth of your vision is one of the biggest drivers you possess. You should keep hold of all the different drivers you can, because you'll need them no matter what shape or level of output you attain. Whatever that output may be, if you stick with it, then it's certain to require a large amount of stamina, staying power, and discipline. And as an engine, your vision's authentic truth is therefore not only a joy of, but it is also a great asset, because you don't want to bend that asset out of its natural shape just for external reasons of marketing or other considerations that are subsidiary to your vision and to the work in which you embody that vision. And that vision is something that's resulted from your whole journey through life so far, which is a complex journey for pretty much all of us. And even if you've already zeroed in on certain themes or characters in the work, those chosen specifics are still able to draw in subtle ways upon your whole self. And your whole self should be allowed to infuse those results, even if they are specific, even just through subtle senses of tone or resonance. Because this will, if you infuse your whole self into it, that will tend to enrich the results. So, with that in mind, let's start with Adam. Hello, Adam.
Hello.
Very loud. If you'd like to start by giving us just a quick overview of Death of the Dream Peddler, which is a lovely title.
Thank you.
And also what you feel were the salient points of your journey towards getting here.
Okay, so Death of the Dream Peddler gets its name from the poem Dream Peddlery by, I've completely forgot his name, but the book is called Death's Chess Book. And there's a poem in it if you could buy your dreams, what would you sell? And that's kind of the big theme of the book. It's about people going for their dreams and paying for it. So it's narrated by a woman called Eve,
Right.
and she gets pulled into this mystery surrounding a man called James Drummond. And he created a company that could make people's dreams come true for money.
Right.
And the company grows, it gets bigger, it gets very popular, and then it collapses under the weight of everybody's dreams. And so the novel is about 5 years after, and it's all about her picking up all the little pieces and putting the story together. So it's essentially a gumshoe novel,
Right.
of finding the story. The thing was, as I was writing it, the character of Eve got more interesting. So in the first draft, she's quite bland. She just does the job. She finds the story, she puts it together. Her second draft, I thought, well, why is she interested in this? So she gets weaved in it a bit more. Third draft, I quite like her. I want a bit more of her in this. And so each draft, her voice has got stronger and stronger. And that central mystery has not got weaker, but has become the catalyst for her, rather than her as the catalyst for it.
Those two things are fused with each other.
Yeah.
The plot on the one hand with her identity and journey as a protagonist.
Yeah, she existed at first just to tell us the story, and in the end she became the story.
Yeah, lovely.
So that was the main sort of...
So, what have been the surprises for you along the way? It sounds like that may have been faintly surprising, but any other surprises along the way?
Well, there are characters in some drafts who are alive and other drafts who are not.
Yep.
And vice versa. There's a lot of resurrection went on as well.
Okay.
When I first wrote a draft, it was a few years ago, and I sat on it and then I looked back at it, I realised at that point that the then central mystery was, and the bad person was bad.
Right.
Well, that's not great. So there's been a lot of red herrings thrown in, there's a lot more going on in that way. And then also, just developing, it's narrated in the first person. I am not a woman, but I was a 25-year-old bumming around London. And so there's a lot of that in there as well.
Yeah.
And as I discovered her as her own person, it just was interesting, really.
Let's have a reading from it.
Okay.
We'll come back to talk to both of you about both your books, but let's have a reading from yours first. 5-minute treat from Death of the Dream Peddler.
So, this is from Death of the Dream Peddler. As I said, the book is narrated by 25-year-old former teenage runaway Eve, and this is where we meet her. Sometimes, I leave my house for the pleasure of returning. It can be wonderfully calming to wander pennilessly down Upper Street, window shop in the chic, shabby antique stalls of Camden Passage, and generally bum around the quiet side streets for a bit. But it's even better to plod back down Holloway Road and enter the welcoming retreat that is Standard Tandoori. The name doesn't do it justice. It's not just an Indian takeaway where drunk men are beached as they flow towards Archway. It's the place where I hang my hats. It's home. I open the door and step inside, savouring the dark dustiness of the hallway after the overbright chilliness outside. I take a deep breath and enjoy the smell of cooking. Some people might find it overpowering, but to me, coriander equals safety. There's an interesting mixture of junk and bills carpeting the entrance, much of it addressed to people that don't live here anymore. Many of them were people who hurried out without forwarding their addresses, the people who never wanted to be found. Wherever they are now, they are unaffected by the increasingly angry letters written in increasingly red ink that join the adverts for cleaning services, kebab shops, Chinese takeaways, and cheekily, other curry houses. I spot my name on a neat little envelope. It's lying on the entry carpet, plain and white, distinct from the colours of the other post that covers the floor. I pick it up and look hard. The envelope has a black border, and my details are printed in some font disguising itself as handwriting. Flipping it over, I see the return address. I'm going to need fortification to read this letter. I put it in my coat pocket and huff up the 3 flights of stairs to the top of the house. Then I grab the pole from whichever corner I left it in last, hook the hatch open and let the ladder fall down. Climbing the ladder, I emerge into what had been described as a cosy and contemporary studio. Most of the room is taken up by a single bed. I think it might have even been a toddler's bed, because there's a pine safety rail, and the only way to sleep is to curl up like a kidney bin. Under the bed are a few wicker baskets filled with the odds and ends I've collected, as well as the clothes I can't hang up. And a rail on wheels manages the clothes I can. There are some hobs, a play fridge at the end of the room, and a temperamental shower behind a permanent temporary partition built from the finest cheap fibreboard. In a room like this, the bed is more than just a bed. It's a sofa, a retreat, and a desk, and it's where I throw the letter before slipping into something more comfortable. I've gone for a pair of pantaloons with rainbow stripes, and a loose flowing Chinesey gown in red that clashes with my hair. Many of my clothes come from when I first came to London and lived a few years on an actor-manager's sofa. It was the perfect arrangement between a teenage runaway and a man terrified of doing the dishes. He gave me a lot of old costumes. I think this leisure wear has its origins in a production of Aladdin. Very cosy, but no pockets. Wonder where he kept the lamp. Somewhere in the cupboard under the hob, I have a miniature bottle of gin that I saved for an occasion just like this. It's tucked behind a bag of pasta spirals and a tin of dog food left by a previous tenant. I twiddle the tiny top, throw the splash of gin down my throat. The little envelope sits menacingly on my bed. All of a sudden, my room seems too small. There's not enough room for the both of us. That return address was from Cockthorne, a lovely little village in Sussex. The letter is from my mum.
Kim, let's turn to you. And I'm going to ask you the same thing I asked Adam, and we'll go from there. A little bit of an overview, if you would, of Hidden Legacy, and also what you feel were the salient points on your journey from there originally to here.
Right. So, Hidden Legacy is a story about two, actually twins in the 18th century, and they are of mixed heritage, African and European heritage. And they've been brought from the Caribbean to England, and they live in Hawkins House. They are part of the family, but not. And this is their journey going through the late 18th century into the 19th century. And who they meet. What I wanted to bring into the story as fiction was to also bring in factual people who were alive at that time, who are of African heritage as well. So it's about their life. Kerry and Henry. Kerry lives in Bath and London, and Henry is sent out to the Caribbean as an overseer, and about his life and how he becomes a revolutionary. So one of the reasons why I took this adventure, because it is an adventure, on is because I loved, when I was growing up, I loved historical novels. My mother introduced me to historical novels, and I loved them. I loved reading about the Tudors, and I loved reading about women in historical novels. But I found there wasn't really that much about somebody like me. So later in life, I started out as a visitor and then a guide at the V&A, and we do a lot of tours on Caribbean history and African history, and from there that's where my love of this subject and then combining and writing the subject together came about. So I've done several drafts of this book now, and they chop and change as we go. I started off in first word, and then it's now gone into third. Henry himself, he is put through the book as in letter form. So he is sending letters back to Kerry because he is a fugitive for most of the book. And she travels all around England as part of the abolition movement as well. So it was just chopping and changing and trying to bring in the story about how these two people could navigate life in the 18th and 19th century.
So much interest and much love for this material, but also, obviously, there is a monstrous evil at the heart of this history, isn't there?
Yes.
In fact, more than one monstrous evil at the heart of it, and since this is something that has come from far within you and has cooked for a long time, has made sure that there is that flavour in what you've dwelt in and are making sense of. Has there been a journey of how that historical evil has changed in terms of how it sits within yourself as a result of writing this work, do you think?
I think there is, what I found is that, there was either good or evil. It was either good or evil. But as a protagonist, it was that whole thing of that, some people thought that enslavement of people was right and how they thought about it. So it's looking at the sensibilities of the 18th century as well, and not coming about it in the writing sense of a hammer. So it's looking at certain points of view. Some points of view also I don't agree with, but then you have to sometimes bring that story out as well, because that is part of the jigsaw. As well.
And I see, for example, that Mrs. Hawkins, although of course she's part of a horrible machinery of oppression, is actually a good person, and she's got compassion, but she can't really change the system.
Exactly.
And she probably isn't so fired up to do so either, really, is she?
That's it. Sometimes the blind eye.
Yes.
Is a wonderful thing in these situations, and at that time as well, the Bible.
Yeah.
It's an interesting way of blocking that system. And not blocking the system, but making that system alive.
Yeah, and as has been commented concerning the political situation in America at the moment, the Bible in many senses has been whitewashed, hasn't it?
Absolutely,
Jesus was not white, exactly, and et cetera, but we're not going to get into politics.
But how the King James Bible was slightly tweaked to suit the political agenda of the time. So.
Yes. Well, give us a taster, by all means.
So in this part, I'm going to introduce Kerry to you at the beginning, and also Hawkins' house as well. Hawkins' house, the parish of Bitton, Bristol, autumn 1776. In pride of place, the newly painted family portrait was carefully hung. It showed the onlooker everything the owner wanted to depict. It portrayed the family who resided at Hawkins' house had power, money, and influence. The painting itself had the unmistakable style of the most celebrated artist of the day. The owner, his wife, and his young children dressed in true splendour, surrounded by only what wealth could buy. Why? Even the two slave children were dressed in opulence. On further inspection, the one thing the owner disliked about the painting was the child. She was positioned far too forward, and her gaze fell upon the viewer. She did not have a hint of servitude in her eyes. "Bloody artist!" he seethed as he walked away. November 1789. Kerry was greatly aggrieved, her wrist being tethered to the unyielding wooden arms of a monstrosity of a chair, her nether regions forced into the horseshoe of the seat. This form of childbirth was out of fashion, but her mamma, as she called her, insisted this heirloom was better for the birth. Mrs. Hawkins did not hold astride with the new method of lying flat on her back, legs splayed like a chicken on a wooden board, ready for dismemberment. A cocktail of days of confinement in the airless room was unbearable, and it was now mixed with the smell of Kerry's own excrement and waters, which collected in the porcelain bowl that had been placed under the open seat of the birthing chair. Kerry attempted to rise. The straps would mark her skin. Betty, her maid, continued to press the congealed jelly of goose fat between the leather restraints, trying to soothe each scream that arose from Kerry's throat. The bedroom door opened and another woman was escorted into the room by a maid, who then, after carefully observing the scene, quickly left, closing the door behind her. Kerry saw by her dress that the new arrival was not one of the household and must be from the village. "Bring clean linen!" she barked. The racking cough that followed told Kerry that the woman was of an age that her time of usefulness would soon be long gone. She lifted Kerry's chemise, her callous hands pressed hard on her swollen belly. "I don't know if they're the same as us, more like animals," she said with disdain. The woman's unsympathetic eyes, the pupils clouded, peered at Kerry's face. Kerry could smell the sweet gin the woman had recently consumed, and the woman's hand slipped under the chair of the underside of the chair and forced its way into Kerry's womanhood. "Get away from me!" she screamed in pain, and her legs kicking out in protest. A slight glimmer of compassion flashed across the old woman's face. Also, a sigh of relief at what she discovered. She was greatly aware that even though this was a blackie, she would be in trouble if this birth did not go well. "What is her age?" the woman barked. "Kerry is in her 17th year. "There's no point in doing that," as Kerry bucked again. The old woman snorted. "A horse and a cow will buck till it's over." At that point, Kerry remembered that she had witnessed one of Mr. Hawkins' prize mares giving birth to its foal. With one last agonising scream and push, Kerry decided to do the same. When she awoke, she saw her mamma had joined the midwife and Betty, and they were huddled in a small group, standing in the corner at the end of the bed. "Mamma, let me see," she pleaded. "Kerry, my dear, you have given birth to an angel." Mrs. Hawkins' face was streaming with tears. "Let me see, is it a boy or a girl?" Kerry had sensed something was amiss. She began to sit up, her arms outstretched, ready to receive her child. Mrs. Hawkins hesitated for a moment, but then brought the child toward Kerry and began to open the shawl in which the infant was wrapped. A boy. The cloth fully opened to display the infant's masculinity. Kerry took the child in her arms. She realised it was not the boyhood that had caused the alarm, but the fact that the infant that she was now cradling in her arms had the fairest skin. A swathe of small yellow curls on its head. She could also see the infant's eyes, although hardly open, were the colour of grey autumn sky. She bent her head and kissed the small birthmark that was on its cheek.
Wow, not everybody's 18th century was the same as everybody else's, was it? Our 18th century was very different from the 18th century of the Regency and pretty and almost privileged characters. And as someone of literary writing that it's particularly savoury, of course, that that child comes out, as it were, looking white, although it's equally 50-50 from its origin, isn't it, in the black slave and the white slave owner or slave owner's son. We are okay for time, we've got about 7 more minutes. So, let me ask you both. I happen to know, from having looked at your website, that you are something of a well-read fellow when it comes to 18th century literature.
I am a huge fan of the 18th century.
It comes over very clearly from your website, yeah.
Well, the novel is an 18th century pastiche. It's like Tom Jones on acid.
Right.
And it's not quite ready to bring to the table.
So, since we have here somebody who's written a novel set in the 18th century, as you have, from dealing with all this, and since you're much better read, Adam, in the 18th century than I am, how do you react to the sort of implicit challenge to look at the canon of the 18th century and interrogate it for its completeness of inclusion as to what it should include?
The 18th century is quite interesting because it's a time when anything can go, and so there's a lot of stuff from it which questions itself. If you read something like Swift and there's one called Colonel Jack, and he becomes an overseer himself, and he questions how right his actions are. But the thing these books always have is that people need to live and people need money, and it's very driven by that rather than anything else. But,
how do we answer those people, Kim?
Well, I think sometimes the moral compass was a little bit skew-whiffed at that time, because I think the enslavement of people were aware of it, and there were people fighting against it. In my book, the portrait is actually painted by Alan Ramsey, who was an abolitionist and painted Queen Charlotte. And so the awareness was there. But it was the case, and it was also a time of exploration and exploitation, and people going to find their fortune. And for the Europeans, some of that was going to find a fortune in the Caribbean and doing very unsavoury work there. So I think, yes, the moral compass, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind for a lot of people in England.
You mentioned Swift's Overseer. Do any other characters or novels come to your mind from your extensive reading of the 18th century where there is some sort of answer given to those evil folks?
well, I don't know if it's an answer. I mean, Swift is always driven by money. Samuel Johnson is my absolute hero. I love Samuel Johnson. He was an abolitionist very early on, and he shocked the whole of Oxford by announcing as his toast to the death of all slave owners.
That was in what year, roughly?
Oh, that would be the 1740s.
Yeah.
So he was quite early on that. Yes, I think for anyone who thought about it, they realised it was a terrible thing. But as you say, most people try not to think about it. Even today, I mean,
Absolutely.
how many clothes that we're wearing have been made by people on very small wages in very bad.
Yeah.
You
You almost have to be well off to live ethically. I mean, that's no excuse. Obviously, to some extent, to have the time to research. I knew somebody once in the fashion industry, and she said, if you are an ethical shopper of fashion, it is actually extremely difficult to find anything that anybody can be sure is truly ethically sourced, and in connection with which there hasn't been an exportation of slavery, essentially, which is what it boils down to, isn't it? We're always hearing of poorly run factories collapsing and crushing people in places like Bangladesh and elsewhere.
So I suppose it's impressive that there were people in the 18th century who did, the abolition movement did happen and it did make a change.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I think,
Do something.
I think it's also about bringing the story out, that it wasn't just the European that was in the abolition movement. There were people of African and Caribbean descent within the abolition movement.
And much braver for them to do what they were doing
in England,
than for the Dr. Johnsons of this world. Of course, good for him, but it was hardly a brave thing that he did. It was a right thinking thing, but he didn't have to delve into bottomless wells of bravery, which I'm sure all kinds of people of mixed heritage orders, not even mixed slaves, had to. Yeah. Okay. Well now, I'm starting to look at the time. It is 12:37, and we're wrapping this panel up at nearly 1. So, Adam, I'm going to ask you, in a minute, I will, well, anytime now really, I'm going to turn to the third writer on this panel, this is me. Nothing to do with the 18th century, but let's see, I will give you a quick, okay. So I should just say, first of all, there'll be breaks galore. There's one break, for example, after the session, so we can continue the conversation, one-to-one, etc., with Kim and Adam and everybody else. But time presses unmercifully. So this session's title included the phrase, possible futures of storytelling through new technologies. And instead of trying to cover several technologies and not doing justice to any of them, it would probably be more useful to focus on one in a bit more detail, which is the incorporation of video into the publication of fiction. Now, of course, video isn't new in itself, but in the context of publishing, incorporating video around and even into the actual publication of new text-based storytelling has been perhaps a little bit more limited than it need have been, especially nowadays when shooting and distributing video is much easier than it used to be only a few years ago. So also our imminent 5G internet means longer form high definition video will soon be proliferating through many new channels. Video will also become as embeddable as images already are within publications and documents of all kinds, which will introduce beneficial opportunities for authors. So this is one of the reasons why I decided to create a video book format of each of my own titles using the same recording session that also created the title's audiobook format. Each title's resultant audiobook format is available through the usual commercial channels, so that's familiar. But if we turn to each title's video book format from the same recording session, the reasons why I'm doing this are less commercial, but for me they are just as valid. I'll screen a quick sample or two in a moment, but before I do so, in case this chimes with some writers who are listening, or in case it sparks any ideas of how this sort of thing could make a worthwhile contribution to your own output, I'll just add that I suppose there are 4 simple reasons why I've chosen to add this video book format alongside more familiar formats for existing novellas and novels of mine whose words would have remained entirely self-sufficient as just text alone. First reason is probably, and this is the nearest thing to a commercial reason, is that the resultant video book provides a ton of material for content marketing into the future. And you can snip that material up, if you like, into very short excerpts, as you'll see, of every flavour, depending on the kind of text that's in the excerpt. And secondly, even if this format doesn't become monetizable, which it may do in future, but even if it doesn't, it will remain as another format, existing for posterity as part of the output of an artistic practice that happens to be a written one, as itself, in other words, as another point of entry into the text, and as a set of assets in which I, as I am now, have presented the best things I've managed to create so far, which is these novels, for whatever they're worth, in another format that will outlive me, as the text will too, of course. And thirdly, just beneath every chapter title, inside each ebook format, there'll be a discrete, unintrusive hyperlink to that chapter's video book format. That link doesn't need to be tapped, but it can be tapped. And finally, general future-proofing. We don't know what forms ebooks and other kinds of publication will be consumed in 5 years, let alone 20 years. But this format, video book, will create assets that may be able to jump in early to those avenues of possibility. So here are just 3 little teasers for the moment, and we'll see if this Vimeo playlist behaves. If it doesn't, Adam will jump in and use our backup method. This is just a little snippet, the first one from Host in the Attic, which is a novella, and it's a hologram of Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, so 1 century after you people, digitised and reframed in cinematic style, set in London, Scotland in a few years' time. One little snippet, see if it behaves. First, he creeps down the growing dimness of the straight stretch. Next, through thickening air, he makes a queasy, dreamlike progress around each one of the several corner turnings halfway down, which surely seem to number one more corner turning than they did before. How strange it is, it reflects, that he never has been able to recall exactly how many corner turnings there are. As soon as he reaches the point where he has a straight view down to the fire door, he is hit by a vision of terror. With a grating rush, the corridor walls and ceiling and floor are all made of wet, breathing grey meat, bellowing in vicious pain, impaled by a dozen twitching meat knives. The vision slams away, echoes down, and is sucked into silence in an instant. Quiet, and still again. The remaining half of the corridor stretches ahead from Jamie's feet, just as close and thickly aired as before, and dimly lit from nowhere. And now he has to carry on down it, as he knows very well. He waits a moment longer, but it's really no use, for there go his feet, yes, stepping forward down there underneath him. While he goes, he next becomes aware that he is seeing every slanted ceiling angle, every leaning wall and object, with an odd kind of floatiness. And he's also seeing all of these things from a little bit lower than his usual eye height, as if he's looking out of eyeballs that are embedded in the front and the sides of his neck, instead of embedded in his face. The wall's sallow flickering is hopeless and queasier than ever now, churning, aslant, darkly founded on an alien discomfort and disjunction. He slows as he draws near the fire door and clenches his teeth between the two dark doorways yawning on either side of him. So that's a little sample from The Host in the Attic, as I say, a refiguring of Oscar Wilde's picture of Dorian Gray. And the second, I thought was going, aha. There, and on her right will be a young Armenian man of maybe 21, of a dark and delicate beauty, in keeping with the silver scorpion pendant hanging at his neck, and whose glass she clinks with her own. Without warning, the Platinum Raven then turns her head further round in slow motion to face this direction, as if she can now see through the fourth wall of the barroom and across the desert to where the city of Dubai spreads out impaled by the Burj Khalifa's spike. The Platinum Raven's eyes spend a few moments easing with infinitesimal precision up and down this building's 30 tiers. Then they pinpoint the Chocolate Raven's little eye-shaped dot where it leans at the rail of level 152, holding up a glass of red that's lit from within by the dusk light passing through it here on the roof of tier 14. The platinum-lashed eyes stop their hunt. They focus more, and now they stare straight across, cutting clear and cool through the miles of desert in between, directly to their chocolate-lashed double's own eyes. On the wet, smooth curves of the Platinum Raven's eyes sits an identical pair of images of the Chocolate Raven herself, ever so tiny and ever so perfect, crouching in the glare of a parked car's headlights, just beyond the power station complex on the desert coast, overexposed in a light that burns her face to white, moaning in pleasure there, impaled on a man in shadow, crouching with her luscious, straight chocolate-coloured hair across her face until she raises her head and the hair slides away. And now her own devastating, desert-eyed perfection meets the Chocolate Raven's gaze full-on, electrifying, animal, expressionless, an icon of ecstasy and chocolate and sweat in wailing silence in the headlights as dust floats around her through the siren song behind the air. And I think the third and final sample is about to begin automatically on this Vimeo playlist, cross fingers. This one is from Apricot Eyes. Back home again, I sit, close my eyes and try to work out what to do. Perhaps a jaunt to West 14th Street to get relaxingly embroiled in police inquiries? No, me neither. But I ought to do something here, surely. Do what though? I get ready for bed, lie back and set out to think this through. My sight drifts up and hovers over the Lower East Side, then down to float above a black tanker that's sweeping north between the high-rise projects and the East River. High smoke coils from the generating station up ahead and to the left. On the right shines the East River, jagged with reflections of white and red and yellow lights burning on deserted warehouse buildings on the far Brooklyn shore. Beside the black tanker, from a golden limousine, leaks gasoline, streaming out unseen upon the concrete. A guard dog howls somewhere, unheard by the drivers. The limousine erupts with a dull boom, swelling to a fireball of orange flecked with scarlet. Cars scatter, screeching. Regardless of the roads swerve left at East 15th Street, the ball hurtles on, hits the barrier, and bounces up and outward, raging and spinning. Through the roar of dirty flame and bursting glass, a flail of tiny hands and mouths, silent screaming, trapped in buckled metal, flash. Then they fall to the river with a crunch and hiss of steam. The dog howls again among the yellow-lit projects, while the black tanker clanks on, undaunted, up the East Side Highway towards the Bronx. So that should be that little playlist. I will stop it doing anything more. Yes, it is. Oh, good, we're just on time, more or less on time. Okay. About 5 or 10 minutes. So, my journey, briefly, with this was into brevity from much greater discursiveness and much carving down and down and down. Have you had to do, both of you, a lot of carving down? Did it begin twice as long as it finished? Yes?
I'm the opposite.
Ah, okay.
I have a tendency to write in notes,
Right.
and to just keep layering the notes till they become something.
Okay. So it's almost as if you are creating from outside, accreting in a sense.
Yeah, it's like a stalagmite
Yeah.
type.
Does it feel as if you're inside it, pushing out, or does it feel as if you're in control of it, looking down from above on a table?
Mostly it feels like you're getting lost, doesn't it?
Mostly. It can.
But yeah, no, you have some ideas, down, you go, oh, there's something more about that. That could go there, and you just keep adding runs for me.
Mm-hmm.
I talk too much, but I probably write too little.
Kim?
I was going to say I'm probably the opposite. I write so much, especially about the descriptions as well, so I have to really pare it down. And with my female characters as well, I need to sort of chop sometimes because it's all up here. I want to get it all out on the paper, every part of their personality. So it's just sort of cutting it away for what is actually important, I think.
But as I was saying at the beginning, leaving your whole self, leaving a watermark within it, nonetheless, somehow, even though it's pared down.
Yes, there's always part of the self that's left, I think.
Yeah. Well, you're making up for a lot of all kinds of female voices that should have been heard in the past and were not, aside from the misuse of race. It's interesting, you've both written, obviously, female protagonists, which is lovely. I've written many a female myself as well. So, yeah, that's always an enrichment, I think. I think.
Interesting, yeah.
It's entirely to taste, obviously, but in my case, yes, it feels completely natural to inhabit through a female character, and evidently for you too.
I might find it difficult writing a different female.
Sure.
I felt very comfortable with her.
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel with someone else.
Yeah. Do you have any?
As I say, I found that's why I wrote Henry's part in letter form.
Okay.
Because of that, I found that the male sort of voice came through better as if I was penning, his voice through, and with the quill and everything like that.
Henry was the older brother of
Twin
Harry. Twin brother of
Yeah.
Harry. That's right. Yes. Well, a letter form, of course, in another 18th century device, of course, sets up a certain distance, doesn't it? Really. Well, he is literally distant.
He is distant, yes.
Yeah, but also perhaps an emotional distance for you as a writer, maybe. I don't know.
Because his views were very sort of skewed as well.
Okay. Yeah.
The literary letter is different to a real letter, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't often, read Clarissa, which is about 8 letters on her wedding day, one of them 20 pages long. And,
We can't do much of a wedding day.
I don't think she wants it.
Okay. Yeah. And Laclos, of course, the liaison dangereuse, lots of letters and so forth. Again, the ability to write letters was in many cases a function of education, which of course was unfairly allotted. So many of the people in the history that you're looking at, they wouldn't have had the resources to write letters, would they?
Right.
I mean, the equipment aside, they wouldn't have paper and pen aside for anything else. but I dare say some have come down to it, haven't they? Letters of slaves have come down to it.
Absolutely, yeah.
I bet the V&A has some to it, does it?
Absolutely. Yes.
Do they tell of small daily joys as well as suffering?
Yeah, they do actually, especially because it wasn't that they weren't writing always about abolition. They were writing about their own personal lives as well, in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, even slaves were.
And not necessarily the slave, it would be the free man or the
Are there letters from slaves?
Some are both.
Yeah.
The ones I've looked at are from both, when they were enslaved and when they were free persons.
Yeah. And the ones written when they were enslaved, I'm sure, are vivid and terrible picked snapshots of what was going on.
It was very unusual actually to have the written word by the enslaved, because it was obviously illegal to teach people to read and write, because that was power.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I have a friend from, I still have a friend, but she's over in New York now. Anyway, the point is that she was an immigrant from Russia and suffered in Russia, and I once said something to her which implied that I assumed that photocopiers were available in Russia. And she said, "Good God, no." She almost laughed aloud at the idea that there should be a Kinko's on the corner in Russia kind of thing. But I think that obviously, because again, writing, including photocopying, is power, and the Russian state, even back in the 90s when she left it, in the 80s, would not have wanted that. No photocopying available anywhere, thank you very much, unless you were especially privileged or something. So now, over to you, any more that you would like to say, rather than me steering things, either of you, about what's in the novels you've written, or what you are looking forward to in terms of next steps?
Well, for myself, Hidden Legacy is a three-book series, and that covers the 17th and 18th centuries, and also the 19th century, then going into the First World War of the 20th century. And it's picking up the stories that have been written out of history or whitewashed out of history, but also to make sure that they are a story. It has to come across as a story of life, and it's life of whoever you are, the sort of the trials and tribulations of life. I'm bringing also my own story, bringing my own story into it as well, because I think with most historical novels, we're taking part of our lives as the writer and of what we've researched, and sometimes putting it back into historical perspective and finding at the end of the day that a lot of our lives are the same. It doesn't matter what century we live in, we all have the same angst and happiness sometimes, so it's taking that too, but it's bringing that story out as well.
Yeah. I sometimes am reminded of that truth when one reflects, what did we do before the internet? Or something like that. And you're just looking back 20 years at that point, and it's a different world. So obviously this is a lot more dramatic, but it's along the same lines, isn't it? How do we, well, guess what? We have the same emotions, maybe very slightly differently triggered in certain practicalities, but it's essentially the same emotions.
Yeah.
So that's the next steps for you. You're looking at a trilogy, you said.
It's a trilogy, yes.
For 3.5 centuries, really, probably. Yeah, I say. A bit ambitious. And what are your next steps?
So I feel I've taken the Death of the Dream Peddler as far as I can. So I'm looking to see, get that maybe traditionally published, see where it goes there, and then see what to do with it next.
Cool.
I did try and crowdfund a version of it about 10 years ago, and it was my failure to do that, partly because I'm not too hard on the old webs and that led me to look at it again and go over it and make it much better. And then as well as that, I've got this big 18th century pastiche, which is not a serious affair. It's cartoony, it's silly, I like it a lot.
Okay.
I don't think anyone else will ever like it. It's just very daft. Everyone gets hanged at the end.
As you do.
It's a bit like Life of Brian in that respect.
Crucifixion. Yes. What fun. I think we're coasting into a smooth finish because we are virtually at 1 o'clock. So thank you, Kim, very much for sharing your things, and thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
And thank you all. There's a break now of half an hour, am I right, Sabina? Yeah. Half an hour, so, coffees.